Once again, welcome to the Wichita Public Library's Excel Formulas and Functions class. This is part 3 of a 4-part series. After the first class, they're just on different topics, not really sequential. We did sort and filter and conditional formatting last week, and next week we have graphs and pivot tables. And so these, after the 2, 3, and 4 don't depend on each other, just the basics class is recommended before you take the other classes. But you're of course welcome to sit in and just watch. So we can always fit more people into our Zoom class, Zoom room. So to get started, I'm going to go over some basics. First of all, there's some things we'll be looking at. And first, I want to review some of the things on the interface for Excel. We have the ribbon across the top with all the commands. And as you mouse over any of these commands, you do get a pop-up. Well, let me click on this window so it does that. As you mouse over the commands, it does pop up with a description of what that icon or button does. So that's pretty handy. And it does even include keyboard shortcuts. So there for the bold, for instance, there's Control plus B is your keyboard shortcut for bolding text. Cut is Control X. So you have copy and paste as well, Control C and Control V for paste. I'm a big fan of those. So we have the Home tab is most of the stuff we're going to be working with. And so one of the other ones that I'll point out, we won't really dig into it, but the Formulas tab gives you a bunch of different categories of functions that you can insert. And there's some other things that you can do. We'll be using the insert function mode. Notice that in this formula bar here, there's a button that has also the insert function button there, which is the same as on the formula tab. We'll be adding some functions just from the Home tab. When you go to the Autosum dropdown, there's a More Functions button, and we'll be getting to other functions through that. Since it's right handy on the Home tab, just the drop-down menu for the Autosum is this backwards with this funny looking E, capital E, which is the Greek letter for epsilon, which means sum in mathematics, and we'll be using that. And so we've got rows and columns, of course. I can select a row by clicking on the row number over here, and a column by clicking on the column letter. And the intersection of rows and columns is a cell. And if you click on a cell, it becomes the active cell. It has this green border. And there's a green square in the corner that's the fill handle for when you're copying cells. We'll be using that some. And each cell has a cell address that is made up of the column letter and the row number. So this right now, the active cell is B3. And you can see that up here in the name box. If I click on any cell, you can see that cell address in the name box. This is E5, column E, row 5. And the formula bar here will show is another view of whatever you put in the cell. And when there's a formula in the cell, you'll see the formula in the formula bar, but the cell will display the result of the formula. So formula is basically Excel's calculator, and it's one of the main functions that are features that makes it really powerful and useful, because it will do the math for you. It's a giant calculator, and it does other things as well. And so then we have a workbook is the name of the file, is what we call the file, is as a workbook, and a given file or workbook, Excel file or workbook, is made up of one or more sheets. So this is a one blank sheet. You can add more sheets. A workbook can have multiple sheets. So I'm going to close out of this was just a blank one, and then this is the document we'll be working with is the formulas and functions 1 from ice cream sales. If you look at the there's our website. This is the link to the Google Drive folder. Let me grab that from here. I'm going to post that in the chat real quick. This is where you can get the materials that we'll talk about. There's actually 2 sets of things. We're going to be using just one. You've got your PDF of the PowerPoint that I'm using, and there's 2 handouts and 2 lesson plans and 2 Excel files. So go ahead and download the formulas and functions 1 ice cream sales if you want to follow along, or you can just watch. It can be tricky to switch windows unless you have multiple monitors. But so if you do use these or want to play with them after the class or during, either way, you want to go to this link and download them instead of if I double click here, it's going to open it or give me a view in Google Sheets, but that's not what I want. I want to download it and then open the downloaded document so that it opens in Microsoft Excel. And you will need to enable editing. There's a button that pops up when you do that. So to get started, we're going to do some basic formulas. Let me come back to that. So first, let me zoom in here. So let's see, I'm going to stop share and do a whiteboard feature here. Bring my controls over. So let me, good, okay. We'll just, so you've got, if you remember from algebra, you have your equation format where you have a 1 + 2 = x. And oh good grief. Let me start over here. Okay, here we go. You've got a formula like 1 + 2 = x. So Excel we'll need to think of it in terms of sort of backwards, where we'll have x equals 1 + 2. Now these basically mean the same thing, don't they? 1 + 2 = x, x equals 1 + 2. But the reason we think of it this way is because when you're doing a formula in Excel, the way you're setting it up is you basically are saying this cell in which you're writing the formula equals 1 plus 2, right? So the X is actually this cell. So whenever you're writing a formula, and it actually applies to functions as well in Excel, you always start with the equal sign because you're telling Excel this cell is going to equal, and then whatever you put in will be the formula that you want, which is the math that you want it to perform. So always start with the equal sign. And then, of course, when we start writing formulas, you can actually just type in numbers in Excel, type equals, and then 5 plus 3, and it will just show the number 8. It will display the result of that math. But the power of Excel comes with the ability to reference cells. We'll say, you can say this cell equals A1 plus A2. So then when you change the values in cells A1 and A2, then this cell will change the value, and it will display the current value based on whatever numbers we put in those other cells. So this is the way we make Excel do math for us, is with these kinds of cell references, like A1 or A2 or C5 or B7 or what have you. And so let's see, I'm going to come back to my Excel sheet. So we have some numbers here on the practice formulas worksheet of our formulas and functions spreadsheet, or workbook, I should say. And so if we're going to add it, if we wanted to add these numbers up here in cells A2, A3, A4, A5, and A6, then in A7, we're going to start typing an equal sign. And the equal sign is what we always start with when we're writing a formula or a function. And that tells Excel immediately that it's time to do some work. We're going to give you some calculations to make, or some logical decisions to make, and we'll spell it all out with our formulas or our functions. So I can type in A1 or A2. Actually, it's like our first number is in A2, but I recommend people, when they're starting out, to use the mouse to click. So I typed my equal sign, and then I'm going to click on A2. You notice Excel, because of the equal sign, Excel knows that I'm saying I want to do some math with A2, the number in A2. So when I click there, it puts the cell address A2. Then I can type a plus sign, and I can click on the next cell I want to add, A3, then type a plus sign, click the next one, type a plus sign, click the next one, which is A5, type a plus sign, click the next one, which is A6. And those are all the values I want to add in this formula. So then I can hit enter. And now A7 displays the result of that math, and you see it's the number 15. And if you look in the formula bar up here, it has, this is the formula that we instructed Excel to do. Now, so like I said, we could type this out exactly as it is, as it appears. But when you click on the cells, you're less likely to make a mistake. And most of us make typos all the time when we're typing. So to avoid mistakes, I recommend using the mouse to click on the cells that you're creating a formula for. So I'm going to hit enter again. When I highlight the letters up here, or if I double click on A7 right here, it shows me the formula with color coding, which is a really nice feature that Excel does. So we've got A2 is blue up here, A3 is red, A4 is purple, A5 is green, and then A6 is pinkish or violet perhaps. So anyway, that is one way. Double clicking on a formula will display the formula in that cell. Otherwise, you can always see it up here in the formula bar. And why am I on the review tab? I need to be on the home tab. There we go. And so the next one, there's a formula, there's a function that is equivalent to the formula that we just did, adding this group of numbers. There's a formula called Autosum. Oh, and you notice if I double click here and then I click on some other cell randomly by accident, it tries to add that cell reference in, and I can just hit the escape bar button on my keyboard. In the top left of my keyboard, you have an escape button, and that will clear that mistake out of that cell and just revert to whatever it was before. So that's a handy thing. It's kind of like the undo button up here, which will undo the previous action that you've taken in your program in Excel. If you type something by mistake into a cell that already had something in it, just hit escape and you can clear it. So now we can use the Autosum, and that's up here on the home tab, conveniently in the editing group. It's Autosum. I'm gonna click on B7 where I want my formula to go, and my function rather, and then I click Autosum. And Excel is really good at guessing where your data is. So whenever you click on Autosum, it's gonna use the current cell where you are and say, oh, are there some adjacent cells with numbers above this cell? And in this case, yes, there are. There's 5 cells with numbers directly above B7. And if it doesn't find numbers there, it will look to the left as well. So if you have a row of numbers to the left of the cell, because you can, it knows you're gonna sum up columns and rows at the end of rows and the bottom of columns. So it always looks there. And it's correctly guessed that I want to add up this range of cells from B2 down to B6. And this is how Excel displays a range of numbers, which is with a colon in between the beginning and ending cell references. So I can just hit enter. And you see we have the same result. I can double click to view the formula in the cell, or I can click on it and just view the formula in the formula bar up above. Now, how do we know for sure that this is actually working? Well, if we change a number up here, so if I go to B3 and type an 8 and hit enter, notice immediately the sum in B7 immediately updates, and now it's 21. And we can do the same thing over here in A5 to see if our formula works right. And if I put a different number in that cell, you see that the result updates automatically. And I can hit undo to change those back. And I can make other changes. Let's put in 85 into this cell, and you see the result is updated automatically. So now the next example we're going to do is a mix of operators. And for this, we're going to have to go back to algebra class and talk about the order of operations. So if you have a mix of plus, minus, multiply, and divide in an equation, Excel is going to use the order of operations, which gives you, and there's a mnemonic, which we'll learn or review to show. Let's see, I see there's a question. Is there a function to calculate the average of the numbers in a column? Yes, there is. In fact, we're going to be doing that in the next example. It's a very good question. And well, we're almost there, almost there. So I'm going to do an example here. If I'm going to do another manual formula, because I'm going to use a mix of operators. So I'm going to say I've got C7 selected. You can see the green outline there. I'm going to type equals, always start with the equals for a formula or a function. And then I'm going to click on C2. That's the first number that I'm working with. And I'm going to say times, and the asterisk is the multiplication symbol in Excel. And then I'm going to click the next operator, or the next cell, which is C3. And I'm going to say minus, and then I'm going to click C4, and I'm going to say divided by, and I'm going to click on C5 and say plus, and then C6. So this is just kind of a random mix of operators. And so if I'll just hit enter and see in Excel is going to calculate that precisely. So how does Excel know which operation to do first? Well, there's a specific order, and to talk about that, I'm going to come over to our PowerPoint. So the order of operations, first of all, the different operations that are available are all on the number pad. Let me bring my, I'm going to show my keyboard here. In this number pad on the end, you've got the operators around the edge there. So you've got your plus is the big button here, minus is right above it, and you have your asterisk, which is the multiplication, and your slash, which is the division. And those are all conveniently around the number pad if you have a big keyboard that has the number pad. That's one way you can remember it. If you have a keyboard like that, you can say, oh yeah, those are the operations that I can do. And if you forget that the asterisk is the multiplication, then you can see it there. So the other thing that you probably won't come up with is exponents uses this caret symbol. It is above the 6 on the keyboard. And so the order of operations mnemonic is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So you always perform first, anything in parentheses. So when you're writing an equation and you want to indicate the order of things to be done that are out of the ordinary, so to speak, you can put parentheses around it, and that's will always come first. Next, you do any exponents. So there's your caret symbol. 2 caret 2 is 2 squared, which is 4. 3 caret 2 is 3 squared, which is 9. So parentheses and exponents, those come first. Next, you have multiplication and division. So you've got please excuse, parentheses, exponents. Multiplication and division come next. So you have 4 times 5 is the 4 asterisk 5 is 4 times 5, and 12/3 is 12 divided by 3. 4 times 5 is 20, 12 divided by 3 is 4. That's multiplication and division. And those, doesn't matter if you do division before multiplication or vice versa. The MD kind of go together in the mnemonic. The main thing is that the multiplication and division you do before addition and subtraction, which is the last part of the mnemonic, Aunt Sally. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Aunt Sally goes last, addition and subtraction. And those we're familiar with. So here's a quick example. In the order of operations, in the absence of parentheses, because parentheses always go first, you do multiplication before addition. So if you have 4 times 5 plus 4, then you do the 4 times 5 first. And then you do what comes next. So 4 times 5 is 20, plus 4 is 24. So if you're writing a formula and you want to add 5 plus 4 before you multiply by 4, then you put parentheses around them. So you have 5 plus 4 in parentheses. 5 plus 4 is 9. Then you multiply by 4 again, and you got 36. So it changes the result based on that order of operations and whether or not you have parentheses. So if we come back to our mix of operators here, the first things you're going to do in this equation that I wrote, you're going to do the multiplication and division, because there's no exponents and there's no parentheses. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. No parentheses, no exponents. We've got multiplication and division, which we do before we do the addition and subtraction. So it would be C2 times 3C3, 1 times 2. Then we do C4 divided by C5, which is 3/4. So let's say 2 minus 3/4 plus 6 plus 5. And Excel kindly did that for us and came up with 6.25. So the point is, if I double click here and edit my cell, it's going to change the value if I add parentheses in here like this. So if I put parentheses around C3 minus C4, then it's going to do that subtraction before anything else because it's in parentheses. So if I hit enter, now I've got a different result. So that's the order of operations. And this is just one that you can just kind of play with a little bit. I could add more parentheses here around this addition. And I'm just using the arrow buttons on the keyboard to move the cursor over, add parentheses, and that changes it yet again. Okay, so the last one, and to answer the question about the average, the Autosum is here, and I can just click. So one thing I should point out, Autosum is really 2 buttons. So you've got the Autosum button. When I mouse over that, it says sum, and it has parentheses Alt plus equals. That's actually a keyboard shortcut for Autosum. The equals is right next to the backspace there, the top right of the main QWERTY keyboard. But next to Autosum, there's actually this little arrow pointing down, which is a drop-down menu, and there's average. So let me make sure I'm in the right cell. I've got D7 because I want to, let's say we want to add up these numbers. I'll click Autosum and hit enter. There's the Autosum of this assortment of numbers. I'm going to stay in the cell and use the drop down and click average this time. And now it inserts the function which computes the average of those numbers. And I hit enter and I've got a different result. That's the average of these numbers. Notice that the function for the average is exactly the same as sum, except that instead of the word sum, it has average. So everything else that is part of that function is actually in every function in Excel, which is it starts with an equal sign, then it has the name of the function or the abbreviation for that name, and then it has parentheses. And then it may or may not have something inside the parentheses. We'll see a couple of functions that don't have anything in the parentheses, but most of them do because you're doing actions with the cells, with the cell references, with the numbers that you put in are usually the ones that you want to do something with. So that's where the cell references come inside the function. And you can have more than one thing inside of the parentheses. And when you do, they're separated by commas. So there's average. There's a couple of others here, which what do you suppose that count numbers do? Well, let's try it and see. Count is just the word count, same structure in that range of cells, and the count is 5. So what do you suppose that means? There's 5 values in this range of cells. If I delete a number, the count is now 4. If I type 0 in that cell, the count has gone back up to 5. So 0 is a number, but with nothing in the cell, it doesn't count it. So that's how the count function works. It counts all the cells that have a value. Each cell that has a value, it counts it. I'm going to undo. Actually, instead of undo, though, notice when I mouse over undo, it tells me what the last thing was, which was clear, undo clear. And it has parentheses Control Z. That's my keyboard shortcut. So instead of clicking there, I'm going to hit Control and Z on my keyboard. And I'm going to hit it again and one more time to go back to the values that we had before. So there's count. And then max and min just give you the largest number and then the lowest number in that range. Okay, are there any questions from what we've done so far? I'm going to move on to our next worksheet, which, as you can see in the tabs down below, we just finished with practice formulas. I'm going to move on to ice cream sales. And this is Jen and Barry's ice cream sales report. They're just starting out. They only have 2 flavors. But it's a pretty original name, you got to admit. So first of all, we have a series of dates here that we need to fill in. And before we start, I'll let you know, I'll give you some valuable information, which is that Excel treats days as integers. So if today was number 3, or let's say it's the second day of the week, and then yesterday was 1. So today's 2, yesterday's 1, tomorrow's 3. Then you can treat the days as numbers, and so you can do math with dates. And so if you subtract one day from another, it's going to tell you how many days there are between those two dates. Does it make sense? So if we use the autofill, we've got January 1st, 2019. I'm going to update this to 2020. And just because it's more recent. Well, what the heck? 2020 was a bad year. Let's do 2021. All right. I'm going to autofill our date down, and notice as I mouse down, it fills in 112. And so it fills in the dates, treating each cell as another day. And that's all fine and good, except actually what we want here is we have weeks here. Each of these is a week. So instead of one day by day, we need to jump by 7. We need to add 7 days. So I'm going to hit the undo or Control Z, and I'm going to create a formula in cell B5 that will take the date in B4 and add 7. And then I'm going to copy that formula down to the next cells below. So each cell will take the previous date and add 7 to it. Then I'll have the first day of each week for as many days as I copy it out. So this is going to be a simple formula where I add 7 to the previous day. So what do I start with? Always equals. Always start with equals. And I could type in B4, but I'm going to click on it to make sure I don't mistype. And I'm going to type a plus sign, and I'm going to type the number 7. That's it. That should give me a week later than January 1st, 2021. I enter, and it's worked. So I've got, when I add 7 to January 1st, I get January 8th. Now I'm going to copy this formula down, and I'll tell you the reason why this works. And it looks like it's worked. Add 7 to 8, I get 15, then January 22nd, then 29th. It's adding 7 days, and it's got all the days of the year programmed into it, including leap years. It knows when the leap years are. And that's just programmed in. So the reason this works is whenever if I double click on any one of these dates, it copied the same formula. And the reason that it works is because it's using relative references. All the cell references in Excel formulas are relative, unless you tell it that you want an absolute reference. And we're going to use an absolute reference in just a minute. But I wanted to demonstrate this. So any of these cells that I double click on, it's copied the formula in a parallel construction. So when it copied the formula, it didn't say take B4 and add 7. It didn't say B4 all the way down. It said take one cell above and add 7. So in B5, the formula is B4 plus B7. in B9, it's going to be B8 plus 7. So if I click there, sorry, that's B12. The week number threw me off. So B11 plus 7 is the value in B12, because it's just saying, look at the cell above and then add 7. That's a relative reference. So the next part of our formula to fill in. Okay, let's see. I've got a question in the chat. I work with a spreadsheet of nothing but names. All names are contained in column A. Last names are in odd numbered rows and first names are in even numbered rows. It's the way to take all of the values in the even numbered cells and put them into column B. That's a tricky one, but I think it is possible. Excel has a feature that is flash fill, and it will, if you're translating cells from one column to another column and doing a certain operation, they've made it really smart where it will recognize what you're doing and it will continue the pattern. It may work for that. I don't know that it will work for that for sure. So I'd have to look at that. But if you want to talk with me after the class, and we can set up an appointment to work on that. So we do what we call a book a librarian, which is one-on-one help. And I'm happy to help with anything that I can. And that would be a good option for that. So the next part of our ice cream sales report, we want to fill in the values for the vanilla revenue for each week. What we have in column C is the number of vanilla quantity. Look at that, there it is. I'm going to change this to, I'm going to take all of these and do the wrap text option. There we go. It already had the wrap text. It just needed more room. Let's see, I think if we make more room for this one. There. That looks better. So we've already got the quantity of vanilla for each week. We need to compute the revenue based on that quantity and the price, which is over here in column I. So this is going to be a simple formula. What do we start with? Always, for a formula or a function, we start with equals. So I type equals. I'm going to click on my quantity for that week, which is C4, and multiply that asterisk by I4. That's the price of vanilla. We have 200 orders of vanilla for the first week, and they cost $3.50 each. I'm going to hit enter. There's my revenue from vanilla for the first week. Now, if I copy this down, it's going to create some problems. Now, why did it, so the first one, it looks like it's okay, but actually if you double click there, it's taken the quantity of vanilla for week 2 and multiplied it by the price of chocolate. So that's actually not correct, though it looks like it's at least a number. The rest of the values here are all, let's see, in the third week, we're trying to multiply a number times the word totals, and that's why it gives us this value error. And then the rest of them, if I double click here, you can see what it's trying to do. It's multiplying the quantity of vanilla by a blank cell here, which is 0. So it shows a 0 value. So the problem is we want a relative reference for the vanilla quantity from column C. We want the quantity from each week to go down the page, but we want the price of vanilla to stay the same each one. So we need a relative reference for the quantity and an absolute reference for the price. Okay, does that make sense? So the way that we tell Excel that we want an absolute reference rather than a relative reference is by putting a $ in front of the row, the column letter, and the row number on both of them. And then I hit enter. Nothing changes in that cell because it's still referencing that. But now when we copy it down, it's going to regard C as the relative reference. So it's always going to use one cell to the left instead of C4. But it's going to use I4 every time. It's not going to use a relative reference for the I4. So I'm going to copy that down. And it looks like it worked. Let me double click on each of these cells to see. So you can see in week 4, I've got the quantity 180 times the price of vanilla, which gives me my vanilla revenue for that week. And so it's working. So that's the value or the purpose of having relative and absolute references in your Excel formulas. So let's do the same thing again with the chocolate revenue. And so again, we start with, we've got a simple formula. I'm going to use the equal sign, and we're multiplying the quantity of chocolate for that week. And we're going to multiply, so I type an asterisk, and then I'm going to click on the chocolate price, which is $4. And before I hit enter, I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, which will convert that I5 from a relative reference, which is the default, to an absolute reference. And the keyboard shortcut, which is really handy because it's really annoying having to type in those little $ in front of each part of the cell reference. I can just tap the F4 button and it converts it to absolute references to the column and row. Now it works as like a toggle switch. So there's either on or off, but in this case, there's actually 4 settings. So there's one with the $ on both the column and row, and then there's 2 more that have the $ only on the column or only on the row. And then it goes back to no $ at all. So if I can hit it 4 times, it goes through the cycle. So to convert it from a relative reference with no $ to an absolute reference with 2 $ added, I just hit F4 once. Now I've got the formula that I need, that I can copy to the rest of the cells in column F for my chocolate revenue. So I hit enter, and I'm going to grab my fill handle. This is the small plus sign, and drag it down. I'm going to undo that real quick and show you another shortcut. Again, we've got a relative reference for E4 and an absolute reference for I5, and we're just going to copy it down. But instead of clicking and dragging, let's say I had 500 rows of figures, like for a couple of years. I don't want to, or several years, I guess it would be. I don't want to have to drag all the way down the page. So I'm going to just double click that. If you remember the keyboard shortcut for resizing a column was a double click. This is similar to that. When I see the autofill cursor, I can double click, and that's going to autofill down to the rest of my table. It's going to recognize where it's going to go as far as there are numbers in the neighboring column. So that's another handy shortcut. Just a double click on the autofill will autofill for the rest of that column. Okay. Are there any other questions at this point? I really like this example for learning absolute versus relative cell references, because the way you have the parallel construction going down the page, and you have the price of vanilla and chocolate off to the side that you don't want to go down the page. I think it really illustrates it well. This lesson plan comes from the Denver Public Library. They've been very generous in offering all of their lesson plans and spreadsheets for free download on their website. If you go to their technology classes and click through to the descriptions, there'll be a link to a folder with all the class materials. And that's where I've gotten the ones for this class, including this spreadsheet and the lesson plan that goes with it. So special thanks to Denver. So now we have a part of this spreadsheet that we call a dashboard. A dashboard is a section of a spreadsheet, or it could be a separate sheet even, that displays the totals or the summary of the bare data that is elsewhere in the spreadsheet. So this is going to give us a summary of this 12-week period, like our quarterly totals. So first of all, we've got the quantity sold, and there's a row for vanilla and a row for chocolate. So the quantity, and this is obviously referring to the time period that's represented here on our spreadsheet. Since I have a range of cells to add, I basically want to add up this column C and put it in this cell for J4. So this, I can use the Autosum, is the handiest way to do it. So I click Autosum, and Excel says, oh, okay, I see there's a number next here. Maybe that's what they want to add up. And then we say, no, I want you to add up the numbers over here. And you know, I don't know if you can tell, but the I4 in the function here that is highlighted, it's gray on a gray background, so you can't quite see, but that means that I can simply, without touching anything else, I can select the range that I want it to add. So now it's added in that C4 to C15, which is the range I selected just now. And I hit enter, and there's my quantity sold. Double click to view the formula or the function. Add up everything in the range from C4 to C15. And that's what it's saying, and that's what it did. And then we'll do something similar for the chocolate. I'll click Autosum and then select my chocolate quantity in column E and hit enter. Now, for some reason, this cell is formatted wrong because this is a quantity, it's not a dollar value. But this gives us an opportunity to review some of the number format options we have here. So notice the data type that's in this number group here. If I click on the date over here, up here, it says date. It's recognized that the format is a date. The next one over, it just says general. If you just have a number or just some text, it's just going to say, it's going to use the general category. And so it's no specific format, but Excel is really good at recognizing text and recognizing numbers. And if it finds numbers, it can add them. And if it finds text, it can alphabetize them. And if it finds numbers and text, it's going to put the numbers at the beginning of the alphabet too. So it will include those. But then the next one over, of course, the vanilla revenue, and it's using an accounting format. Accounting is really the same as currency. It just lines up the dollar signs in decimal places. So you see how the dollar signs are way over on the left edge of the cell in this vanilla revenue. So they line up. That's the feature of the accounting instead of the currency option there. So this one is counting, but it should be general. So I'm just going to change it to general there. Now it looks the same, and it's just treating a number as a number, and it's not any particular number of anything, and there's no decimal places. So it's treating it like text in a way, but it recognizes that, so it'll let you do math because it knows it's a number. Now the quantity sold, I can do another opportunity to use the Autosum. And I click Autosum, and Excel's guessed wrong. Usually it guesses right, but sometimes it guesses wrong. It's saying, oh, let's add up. You probably want to add up these numbers over to the left. But I say, no, I'm going to select the ones that I really want you to add up, and that's J4 to J5. So I click and drag and then hit enter. And there's my total. One of the things that I wanted to demonstrate real quick with the sum function, I mentioned, notice below here, it says sum as number 1, comma, and then number 2 in brackets. The number 2 is optional, but basically I can type a comma and then do another range, and then do a comma, and then do a single cell, and then hit enter. And that's obviously not correct for what the formula is, but Excel says, oh, okay, you want to add up all these? That's fine, I'll do that. And that's what it did. So you can put numerous ranges or cells separated by commas in the Autosum function. That's really handy, and it's something I think I want to try to incorporate into the basics class that I hadn't used to do that before. But so that's not actually what we want. So I'm going to redo the Autosum. This is the quantities of chocolate. So we actually want these from column E. Now I'll just fix that. So that looks good. Now we have revenue for vanilla and chocolate for this quarter or this time period. And so I have 2 ways to do this actually. I could add up the revenue over here and put that here, or I could just multiply the price times the quantity. And actually that's what it's telling me to do, that in the header for that, and the header for that column. So I'll do it that way. But you also have this column that you can just add up and it'll give you the same result mathematically. But price times quantity, it's telling me we should use that way. So we'll say equals, of course, to start a simple formula. And I click on the price and then the asterisk and then the quantity and hit enter. And I can autofill that. And then for my totals, I'm going to use the Autosum to bring those over. And somehow I've lost the formatting for that double line. So I'm just going to put that back in. So you notice in the font group, and we never really covered it in the basics class, but it's just another element of formatting a cell. So you have the font and the bold and the italic and the colors, the fill color and the font color. Then you also have the borders, the cell borders. And one of the options here is the bottom double border, which is what we've got here. So I'm just going to put that back in here. And now it looks good. So you have a whole list of options here, including all borders and no border. And then there's even an option to draw borders, which gives you a little pencil and then whatever borders you click on or drag over, it will add those borders. And you can do line colors, you can erase border, and you can change the line styles as well. So you have lots of control. So now let me switch over. We have a different kind of formula to talk about next. In our PowerPoint here, we've got some examples of formulas versus functions. And so here's some that we used already. The sum function is the equivalent of, if you're doing the range from A1 to A3, it's equivalent to A1 plus A2 plus A3. The average A1 to A3 is the equivalent of parentheses A1 plus A2 plus A3 close parentheses divided by 3, which is the sum divided by the number of elements that you've added. That's the formula for average. And these are some of the simplest functions and formulas that we have. So this is a little display of what a function looks like. Always has the equal sign and it has the name of the function, and it has parentheses with which may or may not have one or more arguments or inputs inside of it. Excel calls them arguments. I think that's some kind of a mathematical or logical thing. So some of the common functions, we're going to get to the date function. The date and the now function return today's date or the current date and time. And that's the example of a function that doesn't have anything in the parentheses. It's just equals today, open parentheses, close parentheses. That returns the current day's date. Very handy. But next we're going to do a logical function. And there's a wide variety of logical functions, but your basic logical function is the if function. If you're familiar with any kind of programming, there's if-then functions is kind of a basic thing of mathematical thinking and logic. So the way this works is you have 3 arguments in the if function. There's a logical test, there's a value if true, and there's a value if false. So with that introduction, I'm going to come back to our spreadsheet here with our ice cream report. This is, we have a revenue goal. Let me wrap this text there. That looks better. If you want to know what I did, I clicked on the wrap text button, which is in the alignment group of the home tab of the ribbon. And that tells Excel whether to include all the text and just make the row wider to fit it. And that's, in this case, I want to do that so you can read the whole title for it. So the goal for each vanilla and chocolate is 12,000. And in this cell, we want to know, did we meet the goal? So we're going to use, instead of Autosum, we're going to insert a function. I can just use the drop down and go to more functions. I can also click on this insert function button on the formula bar, this F little x insert function, and I get this pop-up menu that says insert function, and I can type in, it's got a description highlighted there. I can type in the function I'm looking for, which is the if function, and I click go. And then I see a bunch of things that have the if function, and the first one is if, and that's what I want. And it gives me the structure of the function and the way I can build it. And it says checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if true and another value if false. So I click OK, and it gives this handy pop-up menu or dialog so that I can fill in the values that I want. My question is my revenue greater than the revenue goal? And if so, I want to say the goal was met. I'll say yes. And if my revenue was not greater than the revenue goal, then my goal is not met, and I'll say no. So the logical test for this row 4 for the vanilla, my logical test is my vanilla revenue, and I click on that K4, greater than, I have to use the shift to have the greater than. That's the one that points to the right, because I'm right-handed. My right-handed is greater than my left. That's how I always remembered it. Is it greater than the revenue goal? L4. I click on it. There's my logical test. Is my revenue for vanilla greater than the goal? If it's true, I want to say yes. But I have to put parentheses or quotes around yes, because that's text. I want it to display text, and Excel doesn't understand text. It's not like Alexa. It's not yet. Anyway, so if I want to display text, I have to put it in quotes if it's in a function or formula. It just understands numbers, really. It's a big calculator. So if it's false, if my goal is not met, I want it to display the word no, which I have to put in quotes as well. And then I click OK. And what do you see now in that cell? It says, yes, my goal was met. My revenue was $12,652.50, which is greater than the goal, which was $12,000. So that's working. If I double click, you can see the color-coded display of my function. I've got my if equals if, parentheses, logical test, value of true, value of false. It's pretty straightforward once you kind of get the hang of it. So let's do it again. We could use, because these are relative values, we could copy this formula down, all the way down, but let's rebuild it for practice. So I use the insert function button. I could also go to Autosum and click more functions, not Autosum, but the drop down next to Autosum, and click more functions. And then if shows up on one of the most recently used or most common used, it just shows up in the list. I click OK, and I've got my dialog box. My logical test in this case is my chocolate greater than my goal, my chocolate revenue greater than my goal. That's my logical test. Value if true, quote, yes. Value if false, quote, no, close quote. Okay. And that was met as well. This time I'm going to use the autofill and see my revenue goal for the total revenue was 24,000, and that was also met. So let's test and see if this is working right. Let's say in the last week of March, the vanilla freezer broke down. So we had 0 vanilla quantity in the week of March 19th. So that our vanilla revenue for that week was 0. Now, what happened with our goal? Was our goal met for vanilla? No, our revenue was less than 12,000. So our goal was not met. What about the chocolate? Well, the chocolate wasn't affected, so that was still met. But in the totals was also not met. We were short by almost $800. So let's see, if I undo and put that back, then our goals show as met. And let's say we just had 300 that week. Oh, it was cutting it close. We just barely made our goal with that 600. It's a good thing it was such a good week. Otherwise, a 300 was about average for the rest of the time period. So our goal was pretty ambitious, but we made it with that 600 vanilla in the last week. Okay, one more logical, or a couple more functions, and we'll be done. So then the last part of our dashboard here, we have an injury report. And the first cell here is the formula for today's date. And for this one, I think we can just type it in. Let's see. So I could find it with the insert function feature, but I'm just going to type it out because it's such an easy one. And you don't even have to capitalize, although it's traditionally is capitalized, but I'm just going to show you that you don't have to. So I type equals today, open parentheses, close parentheses, and then hit enter. And what is it? Is that today? October 5th, 2021. That's right, that's correct. I double click on it, you see it converted my lowercase to capitals because it always capitalizes function names. That's just traditional. So that's a simple function, very easy to understand. And it knows today's date from the computer that I'm on. It's going to take it from the Windows computer that I'm on, or I guess if I'm on a Mac, it'll take it from that, but it'll take it from the computer. Now I have another formula to type in. So I've got the injury report shows today's date, and then the last reported injury. I'm gonna update this to say March 1st of this year. And if I just type 3/1, it's going to interpret that as a date, and it's going to fill in the current year. So I just hit enter, and it does that. So there are certain things if you type that it will recognize as automatically as certain things, and that's one of them. When you type a number slash another number and like a date, then it will interpret it as a date. So now I want to know the days without injury. This is going to be, since days are treated as integers in Excel, in other words, each day counts as one whole number, I can just do some simple math to find the days without injury. And so I'm going to start with what? I'm going to start with an equal sign always for my functions and formulas. This is going to be a simple function where I subtract the last reported injury date from today's date. So I'm going to start with today's date equals days without injury equals today's date minus the last reported injury. And why isn't it letting me see? I actually don't want Q5, I want P5. I can actually type it because it's not letting me click on it. Okay, there it did, I guess. So that's it. That's my formula for the days without injury. I take today's date and subtract the last reported injury date. Tomorrow is today plus 1. So the days in the future of another day is going to be bigger, the bigger number. So I'm going to take today's date and subtract the last reported injury. So that's 218 days without injury. That's pretty good. And then the last one, we're going to do one more logical function, just like the goal met. And we're going to say, this time I'm not going to use the insert function, but you can always use the insert. I'm going to type it out, say equals if, open parentheses, and it tells me here it's got logical test, value of true, value of false. And my logical test is, and it's not letting me click on the cell above for some reason. So I'm going to type it out. I'm going to say P, what is that? That is P7. If P7, right? Yeah, P7 is greater than my days without injury. Oh, and I forgot the shift. If my days without injury is greater than 60, that's my logical test. Then I've done then it's a good job. I'll say good job in quotes. If my days without injury is more than 2 months, then that's good. If it's less, then let's say not good. And then my last thing I got to type is like close parentheses. And there's my logical test. Oh, and there's a problem. It's saying there's a circular reference one or more circular references where a formula refers to its own cell. Really? Oh, yeah, and so it is. It's got to be P6. Okay, that makes sense. So you see what happens if you make a mistake. A lot of times Excel will catch it because I was trying to refer to the cell I was already in, which is a logical error. So if I hit enter there, so yeah, my grade is good job. I could have capitalized it, but that's okay. It's easy to fix. But let's say we had an injury on September, I'll say 9/15 and hit enter. Then now my days of without injury are 20 and my grade is not good. Not good. Let's see. So I have to go back more than 60 days to get a good grade. So that's it. That's our ice cream sales report. I hope you learned the difference between an absolute and relative reference, or at least got an inkling of that. This is one of those concepts that can be difficult, and I think it really helps to look at more than one example to kind of get the hang for it to solidify in your mind. I don't really have time to go over the other lesson plan, but if you want to read through it, read through the lesson and look at the spreadsheet, or if you're interested in Book a Librarian to do that, I'd be happy to help you with that. Can you do multiple if then to give a letter grade? Yes, you can. And that's a much more complicated, well, it's not much more complicated, but it is a more complicated formula. And they have, there's actually a formula that's called IFS, IFS. And let me just find it and I'll show you the description. IFS. Oh, you know what? It's not in this because this is Excel 2016. And the if with the S on it is new, is newer than that. So it's in, if you have Microsoft Office 365, then you will have the if with an S on it option. So what you have to do instead is a set of nested if statements. So you have, and that's maybe enough to just to say that the logical test is, so you say if it's greater than 90, then you get an A, and then if it's not, you get another if statement nested inside the first if statement. So that if it's not greater than 90, then it goes to the next if statement, which says, is it greater than 80? And then it says that's a B. And then if it's so, in other words, in place of the value if false, the value if false is another if statement, which says if it's the next one down, then call it B. And then if it's not that, then it's the value of false is another if statement that says, is it greater than 70? And then just go C, D, and F like that. So you have to do nested if statements for a grade like that. But the newer one has the if with the S on it, which makes it a lot easier. Good question. Excellent question. And Ken has just posted the link to the survey. please take a moment to do that. Here's a list of the keyboard shortcuts that I talked about today, as well as a couple others. F1 is your help always. Control Z is your undo. And the F4 was the absolute versus relative toggle button. And this shows you the numbers that, or the variations of absolute and relative formats that it goes through. And then lastly, I will just mention that here's a list of some DVDs and books that we have with links to the catalog. And then we have a link to my favorite tutorial site, which is GCF Learn Free. And this is a link, it'll go to Excel. This is what it looks like. And the lessons on formulas and functions is lesson 13 to 16. It includes the order of operations, the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and the relative and absolute references. So in addition to the secondary lesson plan that is in the spreadsheet or the Google Drive folder that we gave you earlier, this GCF Learn Free lesson on relative and absolute references is also a good one to give you a different context for those absolute references and to get a handle on how those work. I really recommend looking at multiple examples that way. And then there's a lesson on functions. If you want to keep going, just keep scrolling down, and there's more. There's doing more with Excel. There's pivot tables, which we're going to talk about next week, something called what if analysis. And then in the extras, there's where is it? There was some kind of extra Excel stuff. There's like advanced functions, I think. Let me have to go out to the full list. Excel tips. Excel tips has some extra things in it. Yes, so advanced functions like VLOOKUP and some other things here. That's in the Excel tips group in the GCF Learn Free. And then lastly, we have our last class. Oh, this date is wrong. Our last class is not August 31st. It's next week. It's October 12th. That's Excel graphs and pivot tables. And where am I reading view? There we go. There we go. Okay. Well, that's not friendly. There's my last slide. We have book a librarian, call for one-on-one help. 261-8500. That's our Advanced Learning Library general number. There's also a link to the events. And I'll stick around for just a minute. If you have any other question, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.